Get out, and don't come back until you're ready to sign those papers. My son shoved me hard, sending me stumbling onto the frozen porch in nothing but my thin pajamas. The door slammed shut, followed by the sharp click of the lock. I stood there, shaking in the bitter winter night, my own son's cruel words echoing in my ears. I was about to pound on the door when suddenly a voice came from behind me. The elderly woman from next door stepped out of her house and said, "Stay with me tonight. Tomorrow he'll be the one begging. My son is..." Drop a comment below with your location and the time you're watching this. After hearing how my own son treated me, I'm curious. What would you do if you were standing on that frozen porch? Everything started on that cold Friday night in January. I should have seen it coming, but when you're 73 and your own family turns against you, nothing really prepares you for that moment. The papers sat on my coffee table like a death sentence. Charles leaned forward in Susan's favorite armchair, his tie loosened while Judy perched on the sofa edge, her fingers drumming impatiently against her purse. "Dad, we've been over this," Charles said with that patronizing tone I'd grown to hate. "The house deed transfer and insurance beneficiary change. Just sign them." I stared at the documents through my reading glasses. At 73, my hands shook, but my mind was sharp enough to know what these papers meant. They wanted everything. The house Susan and I bought 45 years ago. The life insurance I'd paid into since Charles was born. "I need time to think about this," I said quietly. Judy's laugh cut like winter wind. "You're 73, Dad. What's there to think about? We're your only family." The way she said Dad made my skin crawl. She'd called me that for 2 years since moving in after Susan's funeral. It always sounded calculated. "This house has memories of your mother," I said, touching my recliner's arm. "She picked these curtains, planted those roses outside. I can't just..." "She's dead," Charles exploded, jumping up. "Mom's been dead for 2 years. You're living in the past. This house is too big for you anyway." Heat rose in my chest. I stood despite my protesting knees. "Don't you dare talk about your mother like that. She loved this house. She loved you." Charles's face turned red. "By letting you waste away here talking to her pictures? You're losing it, old man." "I'm not losing anything," I said, voice stronger than it had been in months. "And I'm not signing those papers tonight." That's when Charles shoved me, hard. His hands hit my chest and I stumbled backward, hip catching the side table. Pain shot through my back. "Get out," he snarled. "Get out and don't come back until you're ready to sign those papers." He grabbed my arm, marching me toward the door. Judy followed, heels clicking against Susan's hardwood floors. "Charles, wait." But he was already opening the door. January wind hit like a physical blow. I wore only thin pajamas and house slippers. Snow had been falling for hours. "Maybe a night in the cold will teach you some respect," Charles said, giving me one final push onto the porch. The door slammed. I heard the deadbolt click, then the chain lock. Silence except for wind and my chattering teeth. I couldn't believe it. My own son. The boy I'd taught to ride a bike, helped with homework, walked down the aisle. He'd thrown me out of my own house in a snowstorm. Cold seeped through my pajamas. My feet went numb in thin slippers. I raised my shaking hand to pound on the door when I heard a voice behind me. "Come to my house," the voice said. "You'll freeze out here." I turned. Mrs. Davis stood in her doorway, wrapped in a thick robe, silver hair pinned back despite the late hour. I barely knew the woman. We'd exchanged pleasantries over the fence, nothing more. "I don't want to be any trouble," I managed through chattering teeth. "The only trouble," she said firmly, "is letting a neighbor freeze to death on his own front porch. Come on, Mr. Henderson. We have a lot to talk about." The warmth hit me like a gentle embrace as I stepped across Mrs. Davis's threshold. After the bitter cold, her house felt like heaven itself. The living room was cozy with soft lighting and the scent of cinnamon and vanilla. "Sit right here," Mrs. Davis said, guiding me to an armchair near a heating vent. She disappeared and returned with a thick wool blanket, wrapping it around my shoulders like I was a child. The gesture was so motherly that my throat tightened with unexpected emotion. "I'll make some tea," she said. "Earl Grey, okay?" I nodded, not trusting my voice. My whole body shook, and I couldn't tell if it was from cold or shock, maybe both. I pulled the blanket tighter, trying to process that I was in my neighbor's living room, at midnight, thrown out by my own son. Mrs. Davis moved around her kitchen with quiet efficiency. The whistle of a kettle, gentle clink of china, soft sounds of someone who knew how to care for people. It had been so long since anyone cared for me that I'd almost forgotten what it felt like. When she returned with steaming mugs, I noticed her steady hands, despite her age. She had to be 70 herself, but there was a strength I envied. She settled across from me and watched me take my first sip. The warmth spread through my chest, and I finally stopped shaking. "I've seen this happen before," Mrs. Davis said quietly. "You're safe here, Mr. Henderson." Her kindness nearly undid me. "I don't understand why they hate me so much," I heard myself say. The words came out broken, like something cracked. Inside was finally leaking pain. Mrs. Davis shook her head slowly. "It's not about hate, honey. It's about money. It's always about money. Something about her matter-of-fact tone made me look at her carefully. This wasn't just neighborly concern. This was someone who understood exactly what was happening. "Those papers they wanted you to sign," she continued. "That wasn't the first time, was it?" I shook my head. "They've been after me for months. Ever since they moved in after Susan died. They say it's for my own good, that I'm too old to handle my affairs." I paused. Maybe they're right. Maybe I'm just a foolish old man. "Foolish?" Mrs. Davis's voice carried a sharp edge. "There's nothing foolish about protecting what you and your wife built. Those two have been living in your house rent-free for 2 years, haven't they?" "Well, yes, but Charles is my son, and that gives him the right to steal from you." She leaned forward. "Because that's what this is. Theft. Plain and simple." The word hung between us. Theft. I'd been thinking of it as family business, as Charles looking out for me. But when she called it what it really was, something shifted inside me. "I worked 43 years at the steel plant," I said slowly. "Susan worked at the elementary school for 25 years. We saved every penny went, without vacations. Drove old cars, ate at home. Also, we could leave something for Charles." Mrs. Davis nodded. "And now he wants it all while you're still breathing. I thought family was supposed to take care of each other." "Real family does," she said firmly. "What happened tonight? That wasn't family. That was cruelty." I felt tears threatening and blinked them back. I hadn't cried since Susan's funeral, but Mrs. Davis's words were like a key turning in a lock I hadn't realized was there. "Tell me everything," she said, settling back with her tea. "How long has this been going on?" I took a deep breath, the tea warming my hands, as I gathered the courage to tell someone what I'd been living through. "Susan died 2 years ago." I began, my voice barely above a whisper. "Cancer. It was quick, thank God. She didn't suffer long." I paused, remembering those final weeks in the hospital. "Within a month of the funeral, Charles and Judy moved in. Said they were worried about me living alone." Mrs. Davis nodded, encouraging me to continue. "At first it seemed like they really cared. Judy would cook dinner, Charles would help with yard work. But then little things started changing." I set my mug down with shaking hands. "First they took over the grocery shopping. Said I was buying too much, wasting money. Then Charles started handling my bills, said it was easier if everything went through one checkbook. The memories came flooding back, each one more painful than the last. They convinced me to give up my Tuesday poker games with the guys from the plant. Said it was too much driving for someone my age. Then it was the community center activities. Too crowded, they said. Too many germs." I laughed bitterly. "Before I knew it, I wasn't going anywhere except to the doctor, and even then one of them had to drive me." Mrs. Davis's expression grew darker with each detail. "The money was the worst part," I continued. "Charles put himself on my bank accounts as a cosigner, for emergencies, he said. But then my Social Security checks started going into an account I couldn't access. My pension, too. They gave me a weekly allowance like I was a child. $20 for personal expenses." "$20?" Mrs. Davis's voice was sharp with disbelief. "If I needed more, I had to ask and justify every penny." I felt the shame burning in my chest. "Do you know what it's like to have to beg your own son for money to buy a cup of coffee?" Mrs. Davis reached over and squeezed my hand. "You don't have to explain that feeling to me, honey. Charles works at some company downtown," I said, trying to remember the name. "Davis and Associates, I think. He's always complaining about his boss. Says the man doesn't appreciate him. Claims he's being passed over for promotions because of office politics." Mrs. Davis went completely still. Her tea mug froze halfway to her lips. "Did you say Davis and Associates?" she asked, her voice strange. "Yes, why do you know it?" Mrs. Davis set down her mug with a sharp clink. "That's my son Leonard's company. He owns it." The words hit me like a physical blow. I stared at her, trying to process what she'd just said. "Your son is Charles's boss," I managed to get out. "Leonard founded Davis and Associates 15 years ago," she said, her eyes blazing now. "He's told me about employees like Charles, entitled, lazy, always blaming everyone else for their problems." My mind was reeling. All this time, all of Charles's complaints about his unfair boss, about being held back, about office politics. He'd been talking about Mrs. Davis's son. "Charles has been living in your house, controlling your money, isolating you from your friends." Mrs. Davis continued, her voice growing stronger. "And he's been doing it while working for my Leonard. The irony is almost too much." I felt something I hadn't felt in 2 years. Hope. Real genuine hope. "What does this mean?" I asked. Mrs. Davis stood up, pacing now with an energy I hadn't expected from someone her age. "It means you're not alone anymore, Joseph. It means Charles picked the wrong neighbor to mess with." She stopped pacing and looked at me directly. "Leonard needs to hear this. Every word of it. Tomorrow morning." "But what if Charles finds out? What if he—" "Charles Henderson is about to learn that actions have consequences," Mrs. Davis said firmly. "And my son Leonard is very particular about the kind of people he employs." For the first time in months, I felt like maybe things were about to change. The next morning brought a knock at exactly 9 o'clock. I was finishing my second cup of coffee when Mrs. Davis ushered in a tall man in a crisp navy suit. Joseph Henderson, she said, meet my son Leonard. Leonard Davis was nothing like I'd expected. Maybe 50, with graying temples and sharp blue eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He carried himself with quiet confidence of a man who'd built something from nothing. Mr. Henderson, he said, settling across from me, I'm sorry you had to go through what happened last night. I don't want to cause trouble for Charles at work, I said. He's still my son. Leonard's expression softened. What your son did wasn't just cruel. It was criminal. Elder abuse is serious in Ohio. Mrs. Davis sat beside us. Tell him about the money, Joseph, the phone calls. I took a shaky breath. Charles has been acting strange lately, coming home late stressed. He used to complain about work, but the last few months he's been secretive. Secretive how? Leonard leaned forward. Phone calls mostly. He'd take them in the garage or outside, but I'd hear bits and pieces. I paused, remembering. One night last week I heard him talking about moving money around. He kept saying, no one will notice, and I'll have it back before the audit. Leonard's jaw tightened. What exactly did you hear him say on these calls? Something about moving money, making sure no one finds out, I said. He sounded nervous, and then he'd come inside angry about everything. Dinner being cold, TV too loud, me asking questions. Did he mention amounts? I thought hard. I heard him say 25,000 once. Leonard stood abruptly, face dark with anger. I'm going to audit his accounts immediately. If Charles has been stealing from my clients, he's not just fired. He's going to prison. What about Joseph? Mrs. Davis asked. Charles will know something's up. Charles won't know anything until it's too late, Leonard said, pulling out his phone. I'm calling my head accountant now, full audit by this afternoon. He stepped into the kitchen. I could hear urgent words like immediate audit and possible embezzlement. Mrs. Davis patted my hand. Leonard doesn't mess around with his business. If Charles has been stealing, he'll find it. What happens then? Then your son learns about consequences, she said firmly. Leonard returned, slipping his phone away. My team is pulling all Charles's files. If money's missing, we'll know by 3 o'clock. And if you find something, then I call the police, Leonard said without hesitation. Your son has been abusing you, and if he's stealing from my company, he's abusing my client's trust too. The morning passed in a blur. Leonard left to oversee the audit while Mrs. Davis and I waited. She tried distracting me with small talk, but my mind raced. What if Leonard found nothing? At 2:30, Leonard's call came. Mrs. Davis answered on speaker. What did you find? Leonard's voice was grim. I found it. $25,000 missing from 3 client accounts. Charles has been skimming for 6 months, covering it up with false invoices and altered records. My heart sank and soared simultaneously. My son was a thief, but now there was proof. Justice. He's done, Leonard continued. Security is escorting him out as we speak, and Mr. Henderson Charles will never work in finance in this city again. After Leonard's call, Mrs. Davis stood up with renewed energy. Come on, Joseph. There's somewhere we need to go. Where? The community center. Time you reconnected with your friends. 20 minutes later, we walked through the familiar doors of Riverside Community Center. The smell of coffee and sound of laughter hit me immediately. It had been over a year, and I'd forgotten how much I missed it. Joseph, a voice boomed. Edgar O'Brien, all 6 feet of him, came striding over. We've been worried sick about you. Edgar wrapped me in a bear hug. At 75, he was still built like the construction foreman he'd been for 40 years. Edgar, I said, voice catching. Good to see you. Where the hell have you been? You just disappeared. He looked me over with concern. You look terrible. What's happening? Before I could answer, familiar faces gathered around. Betty from Book Club Frank, who beat me at chess rows with her homemade cookies. Joseph Honey, Betty said, touching my cheek. We've been so worried. Frank even drove by your house, but that son of yours always said you were sleeping or sick. Frank nodded grimly. Something didn't feel right. That boy was always rude when we asked about you. Edgar's expression darkened. Charles came here last month, marched up to the desk and started yelling at poor Sandra. Said you weren't allowed here anymore, that you were too fragile for activities. He said what? Made quite a scene, Rose added. Told Sandra if she let you participate, he'd hold the center responsible if you got hurt. Threatened to sue us. My face burned with embarrassment. I'm so sorry. Don't apologize for that boy's behavior, Edgar said firmly. We knew something was wrong. You've been coming here 15 years, never caused trouble. Betty nodded. We started keeping notes after that. Every excuse Charles made, every lie about your condition. Sandra's been documenting everything. We have witnesses, Edgar said seriously. We've been documenting everything, Joseph. How Charles spoke to staff, his threats, his lies. We knew you were in trouble. I felt tears threatening. These people had been looking out for me when I didn't know it. The community has your back, Joseph, Edgar continued. Always have. Mrs. Davis's phone rang. She glanced at the ID and smiled. It's Leonard, she answered on speaker. How did it go? Leonard's voice came through clearly. It's done. Charles Henderson has been terminated and escorted out. Security walked him to his car. His access cards are deactivated, and I've filed a police report about the embezzlement. Edgar raised an eyebrow. Embezzlement? Mrs. Davis nodded. $25,000. Leonard's my son. He owns Charles's company. The group fell silent, processing this. Well, I'll be damned, Frank said. Joseph, you've got powerful friends. Best part, Leonard continued, Charles has no idea why he was fired. HR told him his position was eliminated. He thinks it's budget cuts. Edgar grinned. So he doesn't know about embezzlement charges? Not yet. That conversation happens when police arrive at his house. I looked around at my friends' faces at Mrs. Davis, who'd taken me in at the phone carrying Leonard's voice. For the first time in 2 years, I felt like I had an army behind me. But Charles doesn't know yet that his world just collapsed, I said quietly. Edgar clapped my shoulder. No, he doesn't. But he's about to find out. That afternoon, I was sitting in Mrs. Davis's living room when we heard a car screech to a stop outside. Through the window, I saw Charles's blue sedan parked crookedly at the curb. That's Charles. I said, my stomach dropping. Mrs. Davis stood up calmly. I figured he'd show up eventually. Car doors slammed and angry voices approached. Mrs. Davis opened her front door before they could knock. Old man, Charles shouted from the walkway. Get out here now. I joined Mrs. Davis at the door. Charles looked terrible, tie askew hair, messed up face red with rage. Judy stood beside him, arms crossed, looking ready to fight. There you are, Charles snarled, pointing at me. I lost my job today because of your lies. Charles, I didn't. Don't deny it. I know you've been filling these people's heads with stories. Poor little old man getting picked on by his mean son. Judy stepped forward, voice shrill. You poisoned these people against us. We've done nothing but take care of you for 2 years. Take care of me. The words came out stronger than expected. You've been stealing from me, controlling me, isolating me from my friends. We were protecting you. Charles shot back. You're too old to make decisions. You can't handle money, can't drive safely. That's when another car pulled up. A sleek black BMW parked behind Charles's sedan. Leonard stepped out, adjusting his suit jacket. Charles's rant died. His face went from red to white in seconds. Mr. Davis, Charles' stammered voice suddenly small. What are you doing here? Leonard walked up with calm confidence, looking at Charles with cold disdain. Meet my mother, Charles, Leonard said, nodding toward Mrs. Davis. Charles's mouth fell open. He looked back and forth between them, unable to process what he was hearing. Your mother, he whispered. That's right, Leonard continued, voice deadly calm. The neighbor you've been abusing is the father of my employee who's been stealing from my company. Stealing? Judy squeaked. What's he talking about, Charles? Charles's face crumpled. I can explain. The money was just a loan. $25,000, Leonard said. Skimmed from 3 client accounts over 6 months. That's not a loan, Charles. That's embezzlement. Oh my God, Judy breathed, stepping back. You said you got a raise. You said that's where the extra money came from. The police will be at your house within the hour, Leonard continued. I'd suggest you find a good lawyer. Charles looked around desperately like a trapped animal. This is all his fault, he said, pointing at me. He's been lying, trying to turn everyone against us. Good to him, Mrs. Davis spoke, her voice cutting through Charles's panic. You threw a 73-year-old man out in a snowstorm. You stole his money, isolated him from friends, threatened him into signing away everything he'd worked for. We were trying to help. You were trying to steal, Leonard interrupted. From him and from my clients. Now you'll face consequences. Charles looked at me and I saw real fear. Dad, please, he said, voice breaking. I'm your son, your only family. You can't let them do this. I looked at this man who had once been the little boy I'd taught to ride a bicycle, the son I'd loved unconditionally for 38 years. You stopped being my family the night you threw me out in the cold, I said quietly. Charles's face twisted with rage. You'll regret this, old man. When you're sitting alone in some nursing home with no one to visit you, you'll remember that you had family who cared. No, I said, voice growing stronger. I had family who wanted to rob me. There's a difference. Judy grabbed Charles's arm. We need to go, before the police get to the house. Charles looked around one more time, his gaze lingering on Leonard with pure hatred. Then he stumbled back to his car. Judy followed, heels clicking frantically. We watched them drive away, Charles's car weaving as it disappeared around the corner. Well, Mrs. Davis said, closing the door, that went better than expected. Leonard chuckled. Charles always was a coward when confronted with real consequences. I sat down heavily, my legs suddenly weak. But for the first time in 2 years, the weakness wasn't from fear. I'm not afraid anymore, I said, and I meant it. 1 week later, I found myself sitting in the Riverside police station, giving my statement to Detective Martinez. The fluorescent lights were harsh, and the plastic chair was uncomfortable, but I felt more confident than I had in years. Mr. Henderson, Detective Martinez said, looking up from her notepad, you've been very helpful. Your testimony about the financial abuse will strengthen the embezzlement case significantly. What happens to Charles now? I asked. He was arrested yesterday morning. The district attorney is confident they have enough evidence for conviction. Your son is looking at 2 to 5 years in prison. 2 to 5 years. Part of me felt sad for the boy Charles used to be. But the man he'd become, he'd earned every day of that sentence. There's one more thing we need to take care of, Detective Martinez continued. The restraining order. Edgar, who had driven me to the station, leaned forward. That's why I'm here. Joseph needs protection while he gets back on his feet. The restraining order process was simpler than I'd expected. Within an hour, I had legal papers that prohibited Charles and Judy from coming within 500 feet of me. It felt like invisible armor. Now, Edgar said as we walked out of the police station, what about your house? It's legally yours, Joseph. You can go home. I stopped walking. The thought of going back to that house with all its memories of Susan and the nightmare of the past 2 years made my stomach clench. I don't think I want to, I said quietly. Edgar looked at me with understanding. What do you want to do? I want to sell it, I said, surprising myself with how certain I sounded. That house has too many painful memories now. I want to start fresh. That afternoon, Leonard met us at the house with a locksmith and a real estate agent he knew. Charles and Judy's belongings were still scattered throughout what had once been my sanctuary with Susan. We can have everything packed and removed, Leonard said, then get the house ready for sale. I walked through the rooms, slowly saying goodbye. This had been my home for 45 years, but it didn't feel like home anymore. It felt like a museum of pain. Over the next few days, we worked on preparing the house for sale. Edgar organized a crew from the community center to help pack up Charles and Judy's belongings. Everything went into storage paid for by the money Charles had stolen. Leonard had frozen his accounts and recovered most of the embezzled funds. Betty helped me go through Susan's things, carefully selecting what I wanted to keep and what could be donated. Rose cleaned every surface. Frank handled the minor repairs needed for the sale. The market's good right now, the real estate agent told me. Houses in this neighborhood are selling quickly. I think we can get you a fair price. While the house was being prepared for sale, I started looking for my new home. Edgar drove me around to different neighborhoods, and I quickly realized what I wanted: something smaller, more manageable, and close to the community center where I spent my days. Look at this one, Edgar said, pulling up to a small apartment complex just 4 blocks from the center. Senior-friendly building elevator security entrance. The apartment was perfect. 1 bedroom, 1 bathroom, a small kitchen, and a living room with big windows that let in plenty of light. It was a fraction of the size of my old house, but it felt right. I'll take it, I told the property manager. 3 weeks later, my house sold for more than I'd expected. After paying off the small remaining mortgage and the real estate fees, I had enough money to buy the apartment outright and still have a comfortable nest egg for my retirement. Moving day was different this time. Instead of packing up a lifetime of memories, I was carefully choosing what to bring into my new life. Susan's favorite photographs, my comfortable reading chair, the coffee table we'd bought for our first apartment 50 years ago. Edgar, Betty, Frank, and Rose all helped me move. Mrs. Davis supervised from her lawn chair, directing traffic like a general. How does it feel? Edgar asked as we arranged the last of my furniture. I looked around my new apartment, small, clean, and entirely mine. Through the window, I could see the community center where I'd spend my days with friends. Down the hall was my own bedroom, in my own home, bought with my own money. It feels like freedom, I said. 6 months later, I stood in my small apartment kitchen, making my morning coffee and looking out at the world I'd built for myself. The apartment was cozy and comfortable, filled with the things that mattered most. Susan's photographs smiled at me from the mantel, bringing comfort instead of pain. My days had settled into a rhythm that felt right. Breakfast at 7, a walk to the community center by 9, and the rest of the day spent with friends who had become family. Joseph Sandra called from the front desk as I walked in that Tuesday morning. There's someone I'd like you to meet. She led me to the sitting area where an elderly man sat alone, looking lost and defeated. He was maybe 70, thin and frail, with the same haunted look I'd seen in my own mirror not so long ago. This is Harold, Sandra said gently. Harold, meet Joseph. He volunteers here and helps newcomers. I sat down across from Harold, recognizing the signs immediately. The way he kept his eyes down, the nervous fidgeting, the careful way he spoke, as if someone might be listening. How long since you left? I asked quietly. Harold looked up surprised. How did you know? I know exactly how you feel, I said. 6 months ago, I was sitting in a chair just like that one, wondering if I'd ever feel safe again. Harold told me his story. It was heartbreakingly familiar. His daughter and her boyfriend had moved in after his wife died, gradually taking control of his finances, isolating him from friends, making him feel like a burden. The final straw came when they tried forcing him into a nursing home to sell his house. I don't know what to do, Harold said, voice breaking. I have nowhere to go. You have somewhere to go, I said firmly. You have people to help you, and you have someone who's been exactly where you are. I introduced Harold to Edgar, who immediately took him under his wing. Then I called Mrs. Davis. Another one, she said when I explained the situation. I'm afraid so, but this time we know exactly what to do. Mrs. Davis arrived within an hour, Leonard right behind her. They listened to Harold's story with the same compassion they'd shown me, and by day's end, Harold had a lawyer, a safe place to stay, and a plan to reclaim his life. "Thank you," Harold said as we were leaving. "I thought I was alone." "None of us are alone," I told him. That's what I learned. That evening, Edgar called with news I'd been expecting. "Charles got sentenced today, 2 years in state prison. Judy got 2 years of community service and probation." I felt a mixture of sadness and relief. Justice had been served, but what brought me satisfaction was knowing Harold would get his life back, just like I had. Later that night, I sat thinking about my journey. 6 months ago, I'd been a victim, powerless and afraid. Then I'd become a survivor, learning to stand up for myself and reclaim my dignity. Now I realized I'd become something else entirely, a helper, someone who could take the pain I'd experienced and use it to help others find their way out of similar darkness. The next morning, I found Harold at the community center. Everything about him was different. His shoulders were straighter, his eyes brighter, and when he saw me, he smiled. "How are you feeling?" I asked. "Like I can breathe again," he said. I nodded, remembering that feeling well. "It only gets better from here." Over the following weeks, I watched Harold transform just as I had. He found his own apartment, reconnected with old friends, and started volunteering. One day I saw him sitting with another newcomer, offering the same comfort I'd given him. "Look at that," Edgar said, nodding toward Harold and the new arrival. "The circle continues." I smiled, understanding now that my story wasn't just about surviving Charles's abuse or finding justice. It was about discovering that even in our darkest moments, we have the power to become a light for someone else. Standing in the warm sunlight streaming through the community center windows, surrounded by the laughter and conversations of friends, I understood the most important lesson of all. It's never too late to reclaim your dignity, and once you do, you have the power to help others reclaim theirs. Looking back at my story now, I realize how close I came to losing everything that mattered. Don't be like I was. Don't wait until you're thrown out in the cold to ask for help. Don't let shame keep you silent when family members cross the line from care to control. The biggest lesson I learned: real family doesn't steal from you, isolate you, or make you feel worthless. Real family, like Mrs. Davis Edgar and all my friends at the community center, lifts you up and helps you stand strong. Sometimes the family you choose is stronger than the family you're born into. I spent 2 years believing I was powerless, that I deserved the treatment I was getting because I was old and useless. But God had other plans. He put Mrs. Davis in my path at exactly the right moment, and through her kindness, I found my way back to dignity and purpose. These grandpa stories aren't just entertainment. They're warnings and hope rolled into one. Every true story like mine represents someone who almost gave up, but found the courage to fight back. My true story proves that it's never too late to reclaim your life, no matter how hopeless things seem. If my grandpa stories have touched your heart, please don't keep them to yourself. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you or someone you know faced similar challenges? Hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss these powerful true story episodes. Your support helps us reach more people who need to hear that they're not alone. Remember, you're stronger than you think, and help is always closer than you know.